Yes.
Some of the things that go on in battle I wanted to explain to you. It happens in all armies. And last time I was telling you that my regiment 16 Cavalry, which I joined after being on the chief staff, when soon as the war finished, as you recollect, I had gone as his liaison officer, his eyes and ears, to the Lahore sector. And I reported the battle scene there to him. But when we got back, war finished by the 21st of September. I got back by the 30th of September. And then I formed up in front of the chief and said that I want to rejoin my regiment because they've had a few setbacks, a number of officers killed, and I think I should get back there. We didn't know at that time whether the war was going to be over or whether it was going to continue. So ceasefire had been declared by both sides listening to Prime Minister Kosygin of the Soviet Union then. And I decided to go back to my regiment. But in between, we got reports that the regiment has not done too well because, according to the reports that were received from the brigade commander, armored brigade commander, who was then Brigadier K.K. Singh, he had commanded 16 Cavalry and he was my second commanding officer, a very good commanding officer. But he was the brigade commander. And he said that the South Indian classes who were manning my regiment, this regiment was actually, during World War II, it had North Indian classes. It had Jats and it had Kem Khanis, are the Muslim tribes of Western Rajasthan. They're on both sides of the border. They're very good troops indeed. Kem Khanis, they are known as. So we had Kem Khanis and we had Jats and we had Dogras. But the government decided after World War II that one regiment should be converted to South Indian classes for the armored corps, because South Indian classes, that is Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, and all that, were not represented in the armored corps. So this regiment, being the senior most, was selected, much against the will of those who had commanded it in Second World War, including General Chaudhary. So they were a bit upset that the troops which had fought with them during World War II so effectively were changed, sent to other regiments, and new South Indian classes came. We drew these men from the Madras Engineer Group, which is very famous. My elder brother, Lieutenant General Surendranath Sharma, actually belongs to the Madras. He joined the Madras Engineers, eventually became Bombay Engineers. But Madras Engineer Group is very famous as sappers and miners, and the Madras Infantry is very famous. They've got a huge regimental center in Wellington, where we have our staff college. So we drew people from Tamil Nadu and Kerala and all that from Madras Engineer Group and from a few others. And this regiment was changed in its class composition in 1948-49, after the war was, 45 war was over there, World War II. Now coming to the operations in 1965, this was the lead regiment of the armored division when it debouched south of the Samba area to get into the Shakargarh salient of Pakistan from the north. If you recollect, I told you General Chaudhary's plan. Being a good cavalry chief, he has to punch. So though there was a huge attack of the Pakistan armored division in the Karan and in Punjab, which we were dealing with, as I said, Napoleon also said that the best form of defense is attack. So he raised a new corps called the One Corps, commanded by a friend of his called Pat Dunn, who was promoted from Major General to Lieutenant General, and he raised the corps headquarters in a few days at Samba. And then he had this first armored division, less one Centurion regiment, which was in the Punjab sector, as I explained to you, 3rd Cavalry, the Centurion tanks. So the 3 Centurion tank regiments and 1 Sherman tank regiment was with the armored division. And we had some infantry troops with us in the armored division. And a person called Major General Rajinder Singh, whose nickname was Sparrow because he used to sing. you know, when the Darbar with his troops, he's from 7th Cavalry, he used to sing very well. So after Darbar, when the men was over, they used to say, Colonel Sahab, why don't you sing something to us? He used to sing. So he's known as Sparrow. He was a chief instructor in Ahmednagar when I was second lieutenant, then captain in Ahmednagar, Ahmad Post School. Got to know him very well and his wife. Very fine couple and a very, very good officer. He belonged to 7th Cavalry. If you recollect some stories that told you about the 1947-48 Kashmir War, immediately after partition when the Kashmir raiders had come in, he was commanding that tank regiment, 7th Cavalry then, which went up to Zojila Pass and blew out the Pakistani pickets at high altitude in bunkers so that we could cross the Zojila Pass and capture Ladakh. How he did that was that the short tank that he had, 15 tons tank, it was known as the Honey by the Americans. It's a very small gun, about a 2-inch bore gun. He removed the turrets and then the bottom of the tank, which looked like an ordinary machine gun carrier, you know, with tracks. Pakistanis thought it was only a machine gun coming up. So these tanks went off on their own, and the turret, which is about 4 or 5 tons in weight, was put into 3-ton trucks and brought up towards Zojila. And at night, they fitted the turrets back onto the tank. And this was the man who, Lieutenant Colonel Rajinder Singh, he got the Mahavir Chakra, who took on the high Pakistan pickets on both sides of the Zojila Pass by putting the tracks of his tank. It's a very, very steep hill road. It was kacha in those days. It's much, much better built now. And to get the elevation of the gun, he had to put the rear of the tank down on the cut side, get the elevation of the gun, and the gun is very accurate. And then, you know, picked off with high explosive shell and armored-piercing shell the concrete bunkers of the Pakistanis and blew them out, so that our infantry under General Samaya was commanding 19th Division at that time, were able to capture Zojila Pass and get into Kargil and then on to Leh before the Pakistanis could take Leh. That's how we got Leh by military action in 47, 49, 48 war. So this is now, he was a major general and he's commanding 1 armored division. And 16th Cavalry was to lead the advance with another tank regiment. There was Hodgson's horse, 17 Pune horse, and 16 Cavalry. So 16 Cavalry advanced about 8-10 kilometers, and they were told that there were no Pakistani tanks because we talked of intelligence. No intelligence came to us that the Pakistanis had raised a complete new armored division. Explain that to you last time. But they had. They put 2 tank regiments in the Akhnur battle, which I described last time. We were going towards Cham, Joria, and Akhnur, cut off our road to Rajouri and Punch. And they had about 2 tank regiments here to face the armored division coming in. Their intelligence was very good. They knew we were coming there. And they were lined up at this Gurgur area, about 10 kilometers inside the Pakistan territory. And as 16 Cavalry's first squadron, B squadron, came up there was a firefight. And we lost about 7-8 Centurion tanks in a matter of few minutes. Now, many of these gunners came back from the tanks and said their Pakistani tanks ahead, we fired at them and they fired at us. And our tanks are destroyed. And, you know, Centurion has 4 tank crew, the 3 men in the turret and 1 as a driver. So where 2 people are killed, you can't run the tank. So they have to abandon the tank and come back. I also told you that the Centurion tank, if it's hit, its electrical systems go for a 6, and it's difficult to fire the gun after that. But the brigade commander, who was a 16 Cavalry officer, as a lieutenant colonel, he was now brigadier, K.K. Singh. His experience of battle was World War II, when General J.N. Chaudhary, who now the chief, was commanding the regiment, and K.K. Singh was his staff officer. And under Lieutenant General Slim, later on Field Marshal Lord Slim, 15 Corps, the from Manipur to thrashed the Japanese and went right down up to Rangoon. That battle that they experienced was really a chasing battle where the Japanese were withdrawing and these people were after them. There were a number of battles fought, but it wasn't a tank versus tank battle like we had now in the 1965 war. The first time India faced a tank versus tank battle in open plains. So they were not experienced about this. So what happened is that he thought that because the intelligence from the government of India and army headquarters, that's RIB and RNAW and all that, had said there are no tanks of the Pakistanis there. They said, infantry fellows have shot your tanks and you've come running away from there. They blamed them for running away, which is not correct. Now, I was still in Delhi when I got back from the Western Front to the chief's office, and we found that the chief was very upset that he was the colonel of the regiment, 16th, and that this story was coming around. So I went and met him. And I also he had a JCO ADC, who is a Risaldar Major, also from 16 Cavalry. I told you when I first joined 16 Cavalry in A Squadron, this JCO helped me a lot to manage my affairs as a second lieutenant who's being browbeaten by everybody. A person called K.B. Krishnan, a very fine JCO indeed, very fine. He was a direct commissioned JCO. He was a Tamilian. And you'll be glad to know that his son later commanded our regiment as a lieutenant colonel. Anyway, so K.P. Krishnan and I, and the chief's ADC called Opu Sengupta. Now, Opu Sengupta was a cricketer. He was the opening batsman of the Indian team against Pakistan in the middle 1950s, when Imran Khan, the present man who was thrown out of the chief ministership of Pakistan, was the cricket captain. And I told you a bit about this because all our 16 cavalry wives and officers went to a party with Imran Khan. We found them very pleasant people and very nice people. Imran is a very handsome man, and all the women were very gaga about him. Opu Sengupta was the ADC of the army chief. Three of us, P.P. Krishnan, myself, and we formed up and from the chief that, look, what are you intending to do about 16 Cavalry? Because the stories you're receiving, we don't agree with that. Because we've got contact with the men and the JCOs. They say nothing like this has happened. There were Pakistani tanks in front. So the chief said, look, the brigade commanders reported that there were no tanks and no infantry and blah, blah. And so these chaps ran away, having lost a number of tanks. He said, that's bullshit. We have to go and find out. You know, I've got information from the brigade commander and from the div commander, who is Major General Rajinder Singh, the Sparrow, and also from the corps commander, Pat Tan, because they, you know, what happens in the chain of command of the brigade says sometimes, well, the div commander agrees and the corps commander agrees, and that's the information that comes to the army chief. So he said, I am going to change the class composition back to North Indian classes. Now, we were not very happy with that. So he said, I'm going in the helicopter. If you want to come with me, you come. So we all went with him. He landed in Pakistan territory because we were inside Pakistan territory. The regiment was in a place called Maharajke. And he lined up all the officers and the men. And his main purport of his talk to them was that the officers seemed to have done very well. They fought extremely well, but few men came back for nothing, even when there were no tanks there. Then he shook hands with all the JCOs and ensured, say, I hope you will all agree to whatever I'm going to do. I'm going to put you into very nice units now, but I'll put the old classes back in 16 cavalry. So, you know, our men are very simple. They say, whatever the boss says, fine, we'll do that. But after the chief left, K.P. Krishnan, who was the chief's ADC, and myself and Sengupta, we went around the men, talked to the JCOs, talked to the Risaldar Major Saab, a chap called Risaldar Major Reddy. What is that? He says, they are talking bakwas. There were Pakistani tanks in front of us, they don't agree. We've killed them and they've killed us. All right. So when I came back to Delhi, I formed up to the army chief and said, I want to get back to my regiment and sort this thing out. And I told you that story. He agreed that I could go and that he'd give my wife a few more months in the ADC's cottage behind his own house in 4 Rajaji Marg. And I was agreed to go there. But meanwhile, knowing that he's trying to change the class composition, I was not in agreement with this. Neither was the Rishabdar Major Sahab, honorary captain, who was his JSO ADC, nor were the 2 ADCs, at least the 16 cap ADCs, Opus and Gupta. So he told me, you better do something about this. I said, all right. So I spoke to the director, Ahmad Kaur, who's a brigadeer's rank. Nowadays, he's a lieutenant general's rank. But in those days, the head of the Ahmad Kaur in Army headquarters was a brigadier. And this gentleman was a chap called Brigadier Kurian. He's from 7th Cavalry. And he, I think, is from Kerala. Now, he's a very interesting personality because he first joined the Air Force. He got his flying wings and he got his solo license and all that. He wears Air Force wings. Then he got into a quarrel with some of his Air Force bosses and they threw him out. So he came and joined the Indian Cavalry and joined 7th Cavalry. He commanded 7th Cavalry. I got to know him very well because when I was in Ahmednagar, I was helping the instructor in gunnery to check various units as to how their firing standards and all that when they're firing their tanks. And I'd gone to 7th Cavalry and I found he had done no work on it. And I said, at that time he was a colonel. I said, Lieutenant Colonel Korean, you've done the work. He said, then what the hell are you for? You please arrange everything. So I had to arrange everything for his regiment, which I did. But he and I became good friends. So I formed up in front of him in his office. I said, look, the chief is acting rather nasty with the regiment. He's trying to change the South Indian composition. Now I can tell you in any army in the world, men are never at fault. If there's a fault, it's the officers because they don't lead correctly. If you lead correctly, men will conform, especially disciplined men like we have in the Indian Army. I'm not talking of the American Army. There are all sorts of wrong things happen. I'm talking of the Indian Army, very disciplined soldiers. If you've got good leadership, they'll do very well. To say that the officers did well and the men did badly, the first time in my service that I'd heard such idiocy. There's no such thing. If the officers had done well, the men have also done it. So I spoke to Brigadier Korean. I said, this must be stopped. He said, okay, we'll stop it. So he and I went and spoke to the director of staff duties. He's in charge of all the organizations in Army headquarters. He was a Major General. Major General Raja, I think, he's also from South India. He said, we'll stop it at once. He spoke to Defense Secretary, who was a South Indian. Defense Secretary spoke to the President of India, who was Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan, also South Indian. He said, we will stop it. We will not allow this. You can't go against government orders of changing class composition when the government had desired South Indian classes to come into the Armored Corps. So we nipped that in the bud. We didn't allow the chief to have his say. Okay. Now I went back to the regiment and I wanted to prove the wrong statements made by the brigade commander, this Brigadier K.K. Singh at that time. Who's, you know, he's the father of our regiment. He's commanded our regiment very well. 16 Cavalry. I'm wearing the tie. He's one of those chaps who got so upset that his own regiment has failed, you see. And he sent Watson's horse and Pune horse behind us. And in battle, there's so much confusion that many of the rounds that hit 16 Cavalry tanks are from the rear because Watson's and Pune horse were not informed that 16 Cavalry is in front. So if they saw our tanks in front, they were firing at them. There's another point. The commanding officer of 16 Cavalry at that time was a chap called Lieutenant Colonel Kartar Singh Sidhu Brar. Now, Kartar Singh Sidhu Brar is Sardar. He was from Deccan Horse, very well-trained officer. And before the war, when the division was in, Armored Division was in Babina, near Jhansi, the commanding officer had to be posted out of 16 Cavalry. And the Army headquarters decided that there is no 16 Cavalry officer available to command the regiment. So they asked Kartar Singh Sidhu Brar of Deccan Horse to take over command of 16 Cavalry against the wishes of Brigadier K.K. Singh. So Brigadier K.K. Singh, who was the brigade commander, was against him right from the start. So within the first 2 days of battle, on the excuse that the regiment had not done well, he sacked the commanding officer and told the second in command to take over command of the regiment. The second command was a chap called K.M. Ghodpade from Maharashtra. He was not a good commander, and we were not, men and the officers did not have confidence in him. So when I joined the regiment, I saw the situation. I joined my squadron, which was still in the Pakistan territory. And besides training them, I did a court of inquiry to see exactly where our tanks had reached. We went to Gadgor, which was still in the possession of India. And I found well south of Gadgor, because when you get blocked from the front, like our first squadron did, the rear squadron will immediately do an outflanking movement from one side or the other side. And we had an officer called Major Sheikh, Muhammad Ali Raz Sheikh. He's a princely state, belongs to a princely state in Kathiawar Peninsula, near Gujarat. He joined the 16th Cavalry, and Sheikh did an outflanking movement. One of the Pakistani aircraft attacked his tank because he was that much out of his turret. And the shell that he fired by the F-86 aircraft of Pakistan hit his, the turret ring, gouged the metal, about 6 inches of metal was gouged out of the turret ring. And all that molten melt went into his chest. So he was very badly wounded, and the regiment had to remove him. And he was evacuated to military hospital in Pathankot, where he passed away. The regiment still goes every year to his grave in the masjid in Pathankot to pay our respects to the man who lies under the ground there. He was a Muslim officer. He got a Veer Chakra on the field of battle. So he got a Veer Chakra. He had a very bold maneuver. Anyway, I did the court of inquiry, and I proved in the court of inquiry, I found 7 or 8 Pakistani tanks abandoned, killed, approximately 800 yards, 1,000 yards beyond where our tussle took place with the regiment. So I knew the lieutenant colonel in charge of EME, there's electrical and mechanical engineers, very well, because he was in the Indian Military Academy for a year with me in 1948. He was in the Aluminum Company, which is people who were already engineering graduates. They did short of course. He was a senior officer, a person called Banga, Lieutenant Colonel Banga. His sons have done very well. I think they had some mobile technology, mobile phones and all that. They are bosses in India. So Lieutenant Colonel Banga approached. I said, look, I want the support of the EME because I want to prove what Brigadier K.K. Singh said was wrong. So I had a court of inquiry. I said, found Pakistani tanks. I want you to recover these tanks and bring them into our area. So he's very kind. He not only recovered our own tanks, the 7, 8 of them had been knocked out, but he also had his recovery vehicles going into further to where the Pakistani tanks would recover those tanks also to our 5 armored workshops. From each of our tanks, 1 or 2 dead bodies came out. And from each of the Pakistani tanks, 1 or 2 dead bodies came out. So that proved to everybody that what was stated that there were no tanks over there is incorrect. This is the lack of intelligence. When the intelligence says that the Pakistan has no further armored formations, and yet they produced a whole armored division. Well, surely what comes from the government of India downwards is not necessarily true. And in those days, funnily enough, everybody thought, in the military at least, that what comes from the government of India and from the intelligence service is true. So the lesson we have learned is, never believe what your senior government is telling you, because half the time the enemy has hoodwinked you. Enemy tries to surprise you. So you think something about the enemy, when actually something different is happening. You have to believe your forward troops. When your forward troops tell you that there are tanks here, why don't you believe them? Right? Now when Hodson's horse and Poona horse tried to go forward, they could not, because there was a hell of a battle there. And there was a place called Chavinda, another few kilometers beyond Gadgod, where the battle finally came to a halt. We could not make progress more than 12 miles or maybe 15 kilometers into Pakistan territory, because there were armored regiments over there holding us back. And that is the place where Pune Horse fought a very interesting battle and managed to kill a large number of Pakistani tanks. And the commanding officer of Pune Horse got the Paramir Chakra. His name is Adi Tarapur. So Adi Tarapur, whom I knew, I told you that once I got married in Babina, we went on a train to Punjab and got stuck for many days there because of the fact that we want to test whether Centurion tanks 14 or 15 can be pulled by the engine. And we went to Punjab and got stuck there. So Adi Tarapur was in charge of that, and I was on the train, and so were two other officers, a chap called Second Lieutenant Chima, and rather Lieutenant Chima and Ajay Singh, the second lieutenant. A very fine regiment, the Pune Horses, no doubt. And he got the Paramir Chakra. So that was some saving grace. He's a very large tank, was his tank battle. I want to say a few words about the Pakistani Air Force. You know, I told you last time that we found our Air Force was not supporting us very well, because even on the western sector, when we crossed towards the Lahore sector into Pakistan territory, the Pakistan Air Force played hell with us. And our own aircraft were not visible. We complained bitterly to everybody that, where are our aircraft? Why don't they sort of help us? And we were told they were doing counter-air operations, that we were trying to attack the Pakistani Air Force. Now the lesson here is that the Air Force must have one group of people trying to destroy enemy airfields, because that's the basis from where they will rise up in the sky and come for you. But there has to be another group of people who are doing close support to your tank products. This lesson was learned in 65, and in the 71 war, which came later, we had a much better support from the Air Force. So we learn lessons as we go along. Now, India also, unless you experience these battles, you don't really know what's going to happen. And people who have experienced the World War II, the wars now with Pakistan and us were completely different, because there were wide open plains and there were huge tank battles. In fact, everybody in England and everybody else was very interested to see how did we manage. Now, Pakistan Air Force, they had F-86 aircraft and F-104 aircraft, which is the latest one. Much less in number than what Indian Air Force was, 4 times larger. But the Pakistani aircraft was superior. And I must say that F-86 aircraft functioned extremely efficiently against us. I must tell you that the man who was the chief of the Pakistan Air Force is a very close friend of mine. He's from RIMC. His name is Air Marshal Noor Khan. And Noor Khan, later in life, used to visit our country very often. And very good friends, belonged to my school. And I remembered him from the age of 11, because he used to train in Sarsaba, which is near Saharanpur. And when he got the solo license in a Harvard aircraft, makes a huge noise, he come and beat up the RIMC, and nobody was able to attend the classes. And all the classes teachers, British teachers, used to say, bloody fool, Noor Khan is here making a noise, or if you go out and wave at him, otherwise he won't go away. Then he used to waggle his wings and push out. Now, this is the chap he was the chief of the Pakistan Air Force in 1965, and I talked to him later about this war. He told me that, we had the aircraft, but they were very few in number, and we didn't have enough pilots. How many times can a pilot fly a sortie? If a pilot flies a sortie, he's actually pretty tired by the time he comes back. And his aircraft is full of holes because people have been firing at it. So the aircraft has to be repaired. It has to be refueled. The engine has to be checked. That takes time. And then you have to have a fresh pilot to take over in case you want to fly that aircraft again. But Noor Khan said to me that they didn't have enough pilots, and he encouraged his pilots to, tired or no tired, but to keep flying. So his pilots were doing 3 sorties a day, which is some sort of a record. And the maintenance crews were so well efficiently trained by him that they were getting aircraft ready so that they could fly sorties 3 times a day. with the result that he was able to produce more aircraft at the active point of the battle than our own people could do. Yeah, he told me this. And he even said that as the chief of the Pakistan Air Force, he himself would fly the sorties many times because there were not enough pilots. So you can't imagine that the army, the Air Force chief himself, picks up an aircraft and goes with 2, 3 aircraft to go and attack us. Especially when the armored division attacked from the north, they were very concerned because they were coming into the Shakargarh sequence. It's a very well fought war from their side. We must appreciate good commanders' work. Now, General Rajinder Singh ji, General Rajinder Singh, who was got a Mahavir Chakra, his headquarters was attacked by the Pakistan aircraft. And he escaped by the skin of his teeth because his tanks were hit, but he was outside the tank doing some study of the map or something, so he got saved. And these things happen in battle. So the war came to a halt now. What is the reason why the war came to a halt? We had hardly got 10, 15 kilometers inside Pakistan and had to come to a grinding halt because the force levels on both sides were more or less equal. You cannot penetrate into enemy territory very far if his troops are as many as yours. This is a problem in 65 war. Now, a few other things about the 65 war. Coming back to the western sector, that is the Lahore sector. The moment our troops crossed to do the Hijab principle of General Chaudhary's plan of getting into Pakistan territory and going to defend, the first battalion that crossed at Wagah was a battalion called the 3 Jat Regiment. Okay. Now the 3 Jats, commanded by a Lieutenant Colonel Desmond Haight, whom I knew very well because he'd been an instructor of mine in the Indian Military Academy. He was a Lieutenant Colonel commander. Very bold officer, speaking as nastier language as his troops because, Jats speak a very nasty way of talking. They have no politeness in the way they speak to anyone. And so the CO was just saying, the moment they reached the Pakistan-Ichugal Canal was at that time not defended. It was a place called Dograi. His troops walked through this town and walked across the bridge across the Ichugal Canal and went on the other side. And there's a Bata shoe factory about 10 kilometers from Lahore. They went inside and the whole battalion occupied some of the shoes and, put on some nice Bata shoes. And many of them put Bata shoes into the haversacks and all that to send home to their children and wives and whatnot. So they had to be called back. And the Pakistanis didn't realize that our plan was not to cross the Ichugal Canal. So though we had crossed the Ichugal Canal in the first day itself, Desmond Haight and his Jat battalion had to be called back. That you're not supposed to cross the Ichugal Canal because the plan is to remain this side of it. Anyway, the Pakistanis got into a hell of a fright because they thought that we were going to attack Lahore. So as I told you, they had to move troops from Akhnur, where they were attacking us, to try and defend the main city of Lahore, because they thought that's what we were going to attack. And with the result that the war continued that way. The same battalion came back. And now the Pakistanis occupied Dograi with a whole infantry battalion. Now, again, the brigade commander told Desmond Haight that you have to capture Dograi now. He said, damn it, I've captured you, called me back from you. And now you want to capture when the Pakistanis have occupied. Nevertheless, this is the only battle in the West, in the Lahore sector. This is a fantastic infantry battle. Because he told the Jat that, okay, we captured this place before and the bloody Pakistanis are here again. And we got to capture it again. So instead of a direct assault, he put his battalion along the Ichugal Canal for the north, came along the canal on our side, and battalion attacked the battalion. And he overran their 2 companies which were on this side because it was a surprise attack from a direction which is unexpected. Captured that. And I immediately, since I was on the chief staff, wanted to see what happened. I went up here. I saw a large number of dead bodies, Jat dead bodies and Pakistani dead bodies lying all over the place. And to the Jat sentry, I said, where's CO Saab? I want to talk to him. He says he's on the Ichugal Canal and arguing with the Pakistanis on the other side, threatening them that you don't fire here, otherwise I'll attack you from this side also. He's arguing with the people. So he got the Mahavir Chakra for that. And it's one of the finest infantry battles that were fought in the 1965 war. 3 Jat and Desmond Hay. I told you that on the Burki sector, that's in the central area, the General Sybil was commanding the 7th Division. And we captured Burki by the Force 6. I told you last time that the Force 6 was the Sarageri battalion. Sarageri is, I told you, a very famous battle fought during 1890 during the British Raj, where the same battalion, about 30 of the men, every man was killed defending their picket, which was attacked by frontier tribesmen, Afghan tribesmen, but thousands of tribesmen were also killed. So it's a very famous battle. Each man was given a very high award at that time. Each man. This is the same battalion. It so happened that the day they captured Burki was the anniversary of the Saragari battle. And the army commander, Harbaksh Singh. Now, General Harbaksh Singh was a very fine army commander. There are 2 brothers, Harbaksh Singh and Gurbaksh Singh. Harbaksh Singh is the younger brother. They are both married to Canadian Sikh women, right? And Gurbaksh Singh was in the state forces of Patiala, but he came to the Indian Army. He was a brigadier. But Harbaksh Singh went up to Lieutenant General, became the army commander. And in those days, the Western Army commander had a huge task. He had the whole of Ladakh, whole of Kashmir, whole of Jammu, whole of Punjab, and bit of Rajasthan under his command, which is 4 army commanders now, right? But he told, he's the colonel of the 4-6, the Saragari battalion. He told the CEO of 4-6, that is Lieutenant Colonel Anand Singh, said, this is the Saragari day tomorrow. Why don't you recapture Khemkaran? Because Khemkaran in the south, where the Pakistan armored dip had attacked with an infantry division, had been captured by the Pakistanis. And the armored dip proceeded further, but they came to grief because we knocked them out and they withdrew. Indian intelligence did not know what was the situation in Khemkaran, what was the situation behind Khemkaran. We thought that the Pakistanis had withdrawn from there. And the div commander of 4 infantry div that was there, he's also a chap called Gurbaksh Singh, by the way. He's a gunner officer. His G1 operation was also a gunner officer. So Kwinder Singh. They had a very good defensive position on the road from Khemkaran, which goes to Harike headworks. And they maintained their positions in the ground, despite the fact